Hey guys, and welcome to my channel. Today's video I'm talking about some Stephen King horror movies that no one talks about enough. So Stephen King is a name you've probably heard in the horror genre. He's hugely influential in the genre. He has several horror movies that are based on his works that have gone on to become cult classics or just classics in general, including The Shining, which is my personal favorite, and Carrie. But there are so many other Stephen King horror movies that are just as good. They just aren't talked about enough. So the first movie I want to talk about is Rose Red. So Rose Red is a 2002 miniseries that aired on ABC. This is based on a Stephen King screenplay, not a Stephen King book. So this is basically Stephen King's version of The Haunting of Hill House. The story centers around a college parapsychologist who recruits a group of gifted individuals who have psychic abilities to investigate this infamous mansion known as Rose Red. This home is super haunted and it basically has a mind of its own, and it's very much inspired by the real-life Winchester house in San Jose, California. So, fun fact is this one was originally planned to be a feature film. The remake of The Haunting of the Hill House, aka The Haunting, came out and that changed plans, so they made it into a miniseries. This one had a lot of marketing behind it. I liked this one so much. I think it's a really fun haunted house story and the cast is excellent. I love the setting, the atmosphere. It just feels like a cozy haunted house story, and I love that the house has a mind of its own and it's kind of changing. It has endless hallways and it's just so unpredictable, and it just made things more dangerous for our characters. I think it's a little dated, but I do still think it holds up pretty well, and I think it's just as enjoyable as classics like The Haunting of Hill House. Next, I want to talk about Storm of the Century. Storm of the Century is another one that is not based on an original book by Stephen King, but Stephen King wrote the screenplay. This is about a small island town in Maine that is visited by a mysterious and dangerous stranger just as the town is hit with the storm of a century, and it basically knocks out their power and cuts them off from the mainland. So over the course of the series, you find out this stranger's intentions, a lot of people start dying, and things start changing between the people in the town as we learn and uncover their secrets, their past, their histories together. Not only do these characters have to worry about the snow, but they gotta worry about being killed by this creepy stranger. I love this one. I love the setting, the small island setting, and I'm pretty sure that Mike Flanagan was inspired by this for Midnight Mass. It's a very similar concept and the towns are very similar. I think this one has some really standout characters, and it has one of Stephen King's best villains I've ever seen in Andre Lenoge. He's this guy that is super suave and charming on the surface, and he seems normal, but you realize he's super powerful and he has the ability to get into people's heads, literally, and control them and make them do what he wants. And the fact that you can't do anything to protect yourself from that, it's just absolutely terrifying. And he does some really messed up stuff, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants. And he doesn't tell them what he wants right off the bat. He makes them work for it. And I love that all of the characters in this little town have these dark secrets and they're not perfect. It just really highlights that small town mentality and how small towns people often will cover up for a person who does something wrong. Like, they abide by their own rules, and Andre Lenoge forces them to deal with that and brings all of that stuff to the surface. It also has one of my favorite Stephen King protagonists in Mike Anderson. He plays the constable in the town and he just is such a stand-up guy. He seems like the purest soul on the island, and he's forced to go through some horrific stuff. You can't help but root for him while he's going through all this. He's trying to take care of the town and the town starts turning on him. It's just such an interesting watch of the dynamic between the townspeople and seeing how they react when put into a difficult life or death situation. I feel like this is the perfect winter horror watch because it's just, it feels cold. You feel cold because it's constantly snowing and it's just so dreary, and you just want to cozy up under a blanket and just be thankful that Andre Lenoge isn't real, because it would suck if he was. Then we have The Night Flier. So The Night Flier is based on a Stephen King short story of the same name. So this one centers around a tabloid reporter who is approached by this guy who says he has this story that he thinks he would be interested in, and it's about this brutal murder that happened on a rural airfield. And the guy believes that the murder was committed by a vampire who is also a pilot. At first, the reporter's like, I'm not interested. This this is crazy, that doesn't sound believable, but then additional murders start happening. They're just as brutal and bloody as the first one. So he begins to investigate and we follow him on his investigation, and he also teams up with a newbie reporter, and what he thinks is gonna be a really fun story ends up getting him dangerously over his head. I love the main character because he's so ruthless and almost just as evil as the villain. He doesn't really grow in any way. He's just very selfish and trying to get the story. He uses the newbie reporter to his advantage and he kind of throws her away. So it's hard to root for him, but also you don't want to see this person get into a dangerous situation, which they do get into a dangerous situation. This movie has one of the most horrific climaxes I've ever witnessed on screen, and it's so bloody, it's so bleak and brutal, and it's scary. It's legitimately scary. Next we have Silver Bullet. I think Silver Bullet is a werewolf film that doesn't get enough love. So this is based on Stephen King's short story cycle of the werewolf. This centers on a small town that is experiencing a series of brutal murders all around the town. And soon a young wheelchair-bound young boy and his uncle and sister, they discover that the murders are being committed by a werewolf, and they decide it's up to them to stop the werewolf and save the day. So I think this movie has an incredible cast. We have Corey Haim as the little boy who's just a standout. He's so cute and so charming, and you can understand why he became the heartthrob he was in the 80s. And then we have Gary Busey as his uncle, who is just playing Gary Busey basically, and it's just so fun to watch their dynamic. And I also love the small town vibes and the brutality to the kills, and you can't help but worry for our main protagonist because he is very limited in what he can do, but also he doesn't let his wheelchair get in the way and stop him from doing what he needs to do. Like, he doesn't let it hold him back, and he turns his wheelchair into a weapon. The movie had a lot of issues in production, specifically revolving around the werewolf. I think that Stephen King had a different idea in mind for what he wanted the werewolf to look like than what the filmmakers did. The film was supposed to originally be directed by Don Coscarelli, who did Phantasm, and then he ended up leaving the production and it was directed by somebody else. So I think a lot of that had to factor into why the film didn't do so well, and it's not really discussed enough. But I think it's slowly now over the years become a cult classic, and a lot more people are coming around to liking it. And lastly we have 1408. This is based on the short story of the same name, and the story centers around a travel writer who goes to various locations around the world to discover if they're haunted or not. And while he's on this book tour, he hears about this mysterious room 1408 in this New York City hotel, and he decides to go there so he can see for himself. And when he gets there, he gets a little bit more than he bargained for. What I love about this movie is John Cusack is excellent in this. He gives one of his best performances, I think. He starts off the film as very jaded and selfish and not really somebody you can root for, and then as he's experiencing all of these horrifying things in this room and forced to deal with his past and his demons, we see him grow and become more selfless, and he is really fighting for his life when in the beginning of the film he was kind of just done with everything. So I loved watching him, and also the scares in this are really well done. I think that the scares are very well timed, and it just has that poltergeist feel to it. Like, the scares are super fun and over the top at times, and they don't feel too brutal or bleak. It is almost light and eerie, even though I know some of the things that are happening are horrifying. It just never felt too real to me, so that makes it more fun and enjoyable to watch. I think the story is very fast-paced, it's claustrophobic at times, and I think it will very much have you on the edge of your seat. And there you have it. Those are just a few of the best Stephen King horror movies and miniseries that don't get talked about enough. Let me know what you think about my selections and what movies you would add to the list. And if you like this video, hit that like button, and if you want to see more spooky videos like this from me, I talk about horror movies, books, and more, hit that subscribe button, and I will catch you next time in another video. Bye guys.